Hello, this is your brain on drugs, and this is a punk rock psychiatrist. So that was a song entitled "Nailing Descartes to the Wall." Liquid meat is still murder, and liquids in parentheses, and that is a song by the um, I believe vegan, but at least vegetarian punk rock band Propagandhi. I don't know if I've used any of their songs yet. I've wanted to. They're a great band, very political. I know that the song is pretty strongly down on like meat is murder. Obviously, it's in the title of the song, but I thought as we were kind of rounding out our episode on nutrition, do I necessarily adhere or agree to everything in the songs that I put in here? No, but I it's a great song. It's a great band, and I think it has something to do. It has something to do with what we're eating. So, without further ado, what are we talking about today? Well, I've got a couple of short topics that I thought I would throw together in a hodgepodge, so that I would just round out our nutrition stuff, right? So, we're going to talk about cholesterol. We're going to talk about protein, and then I'm going to give some food recommendations specific to mental health. I gave like some general food recommendations before. I'm going to give some more specific to mental health. Honestly, they're about the same, but there's a little bit of different details in there. And we just had, I'm doing a lot of controversial topics in here. I brought up the ketogenic diet. I got some comments about, there's it's very like black and white, like all in or all out on things like this. We talked about fat in the last episode. I told you I'm not that worried about saturated fat. However, I am worried about a lot of the foods that saturate, like I think isolated saturated fat in and of itself, we don't have a lot of good evidence that it's connected to mortality, cardiovascular disease, and things. And I think, organizations like the American Heart Association would probably disagree with me. But I mean, most of the recent research, and you can listen to the last episode to hear that, um, don't really support that. But at the same time, like the foods that those are found in, for the most part, kind of are associated with worse outcomes. And so it's kind of like, well, how am I going to eat that if I'm not eating the foods that they're in? So it's tricky. And cholesterol, we're going to talk about first, is actually a little bit less controversial now. It used to be thought that eating cholesterol was like super bad for you, but and then it was like, well, maybe not. Maybe it's the saturated fat that raises the cholesterol, and then it's like, well, maybe not that either. Maybe it's the unrefined or not unrefined but overly refined carbohydrate products that raise cholesterol. And nutrition, like I said, I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a nutrition scientist. I'm a physician, and I watch a lot of these videos on YouTube trying to figure out what the truth is. And it's like you've got all these advocates and you've got scientists and doctors on both sides that are like all in on one side and then all in on the opposite side. And like I hear a lot of stuff on the scientist side of like, this guy's not a scientist. But then as physicians, we're also criticized for not knowing anything about nutrition. And so it's like, okay, you're upset with us for preaching about nutrition, but then you're upset if we don't educate patients about nutrition. I mean, I'm not really sure what to do with that, right? I think the the reality is not easy to find out. All right, but like I will go over at the end the diet that I would suggest for best health that I think you can't really go wrong with. But without further ado, let's find out about cholesterol. All right, so cholesterol is really important for the body. Like it got a bad name for a long time, but it's like critical as something that's used in cell membranes and particularly in the brain. A quarter of the body's free cholesterol is actually found in the central nervous system, which is my system as a psychiatrist. Cholesterol is needed for forming nerve synapses and for making myelin, which are the sheaths that cover the axons of the neurons that help them conduct their signal. Cholesterol might be involved in GABA and NMDA receptor signaling, which are two um, receptors and chemicals that are really important to what I do and what a lot of my drugs have to do with. Also, opioid signaling and the transport of excitatory amino acids. I don't know a lot about this excitatory amino acids. I mean, excitatory means that we're causing more activity in the neuron to make it, do something rather than like slow something down. And amino acids are like the components of proteins. So I don't know what these excitatory amino acids are actually, but cholesterol may be involved with that. The opioid signaling, I know about that, and that's involved with psychiatry as well. Low serum cholesterol has been linked to numerous scientific papers to suicide, accidents, and violence. And so this idea that like we need to have like super, super low cholesterol is actually probably not a great idea. You don't want it high, but like anything, you need it in balance. Depleting cholesterol impairs the function of the serotonin 1A receptor and the serotonin 7 receptor and reduces the ability of the membrane serotonin transporter to do its thing. So, like, those are all things important for mood and anxiety. And I mean, we even have like antipsychotics interacting with some of these receptors. So, we need cholesterol. And low serotonin is associated with violent suicide, impulsive acts, hostility, and aggression. So, and remember, if we're reducing the ability of the membrane serotonin transporter to do its thing, if we don't have enough cholesterol, that affects serotonin, and then that affects these other things. So we need cholesterol. That's the first thing, right? And here's the other thing, and this is where the big controversy was for a long time. And like, this is something I think that like both sides of the aisle are kind of on in agreement with, is that dietary cholesterol is very unlikely to affect serum cholesterol. So basically, the cholesterol I put in my mouth is very unlikely to directly end up in my blood. Um, there are some patients that may be affected, and if you just gorge yourself on cholesterol, it might cause a problem. But eating foods that are high in cholesterol, like eggs, for example, is not likely to affect the cholesterol in your blood, and the cholesterol in your blood is what we're really worried about. So it's like, what's going on here? So almost all cholesterol in the body is produced by the liver, right? So our liver makes cholesterol. It makes the amount of cholesterol that we need. When you eat cholesterol, it's typically getting absorbed and chopped up, as most of the things that we eat are, and it's not passing into our bloodstream intact, right? I think there's a lot of these supplements that people eat, and I always think like that's just going to get like chopped up in our gastrointestinal system, and it's like, what is our body going to put it back together as it was when we swallowed it? No, it's not. You're basically going to get the component parts of it. You're not going to get like the thing that you actually wanted in your system. This is how I feel about a lot of this collagen stuff, and like there may be ways to get it in, but like a lot of that is just going to get chopped up, and it's like that's not necessarily going to, just because you have the components to make collagen doesn't mean your body's going to like say, hey, I'm going to make some collagen with these components that used to be collagen that you swallowed. um, the same goes with cholesterol. Just because you ate cholesterol and it got chopped up doesn't mean it's going to be put back together as cholesterol. Those component parts can be put back together to make other things. All right, so our liver is what's making cholesterol. All right, so and here's the other thing, the most concerning, um, and we talked about this in the last episode, because we were talking about how saturated fat could affect cholesterol, and which is a controversial topic. And I tend to believe that saturated fat in isolation is not really increasing our small, dense LDL. It's increasing our large, buoyant LDL. We talked about that on the last episode. So we're mostly concerned with the small, dense LDL, which is increased in response to a diet of sugar and highly processed grains. Small, dense LDL is the most atherosclerotic cholesterol. So atherosclerotic, that means like you're damaging blood vessels, you're having plaque buildups, you're setting yourself up for coronary artery disease, strokes, heart attacks, um, just vascular disease in general, right? So diseases that have to do with clogged vessels, and Although, remember, and we talked about on the fats episode that you can order specific tests for small dense LDL. There's actually a calculation where you don't have to do that, right? And so this is, I mean, I'm just going to say what it is. You can look at the slides or look this up yourself if you want to do this. So first you have to calculate the large buoyant LDL, and this is just an estimate. So it's actually 1.43 times your LDL, which is what we get. It's also calculated, but it's actually it's spit out on our test. So we get an answer for what LDL is on our blood test. So 1.43 times LDL minus zero point 0.4 times the natural logarithm of the triglyceride number times LDL, minus 8.99. And there's a bunch of parentheses in there that are important to get the math right. So it's kind of a complicated equation. But then to get small dense LDL, it's basically you've got two types of LDL. So you just take your total LDL and subtract the large buoyant LDL, and you get your small dense LDL. All right. And this measurement is less correlated with measured small dense LDL in patients with diabetes, patients with low small dense LDL, and non-fasting patients. So if they don't fast, they have diabetes, or they have really low small dense LDL, that equation may not be accurate. All right. But if they have really low small dense LDL, then we're not really concerned about those patients, right? We're trying to find the people with higher amounts. And of course, you got to fast for your cholesterol test. So that throws everything off. And then it's interesting that diabetes can kind of throw it off too. So a lot of people have diabetes, so this formula may not work for those folks. All right. So saturated fat intake is associated with increases in large buoyant LDL, which is not thought to be atherosclerotic and may be protective. So that's what we mentioned last time as well. So your liver makes your cholesterol, your diet doesn't. But at the same time, you'll see like limit your diet to 7 eggs a week or something. It's like, for a while I had chickens. I had to get rid of them, unfortunately. Um, but they, I didn't kill them. I gave them away. Um, I was eating like 2, 3 eggs a day for a while because I had 4 chickens and I got an egg a day. So I was eating a lot of eggs. My cholesterol numbers weren't really affected when I had them checked. I mean, but I'm an N of one, I'm just one case. But regardless, you should probably not eat, like, I've seen these YouTube videos. I'm going to eat 100 eggs in a week. All I'm going to eat is eggs and raw milk. Like, no, not a good idea, man. That is just, it's just, this is insanity. That's not a normal diet, and that is you're overloading your system with stuff and you're lacking things that you need. So I do not recommend that. All right. So, and then let's just briefly talk about statins, which are the first line treatment if you have high LDL. I think these are overused. All right. So, one, these should not be given to patients outside the age range 40 to 75 for the most part. So the only people that really have improved mortality with taking a statin are those that are aged 40 to 75 with diabetes or hypertension and an ASCVD, which is a score of how likely you are to have heart disease. Their ASCVD 10-year risk, so that would be heart disease within 10 years, over 10%. So if your risk of getting heart disease is less than 10% in the next 10 years, then you don't need to take these. I mean, there's some situations where I think over 7%, it's like, talk to your doctor or whatever. But for the most part, it's over 10%. Um, so they don't improve mortality unless you meet that criteria and some others. If you have a history of cardiovascular disease, so you already had cardiovascular disease, you had a heart attack, you had a stroke, you had something, you had some peripheral artery disease, then statins are going to help you. If you're over 65 and you have chronic kidney disease, they're going to help. If you have chronic kidney disease and high inflammatory markers, it could help. But if you don't meet any of these criteria, then the statins are not really giving you any mortality benefits. So like they might lower your cholesterol, but they're not, decreasing your likelihood of dying, right? So that's why, we want to go through the formula that everyone should be using with the ASCVD calculator and, do they have history of cardiovascular disease, chronic kidney disease, this sort of stuff, because there are risks with statins, right? So there's actually evidence that statins could cross the blood-brain barrier. Some of them, like simvastatin and atorvastatin, and negatively impact serotonin, which could be bad. They can also cause like muscle pain and like rhabdomyolysis, and they're handled by the enzyme 3A4. And if you're taking a 3A4 inhibitor, which a lot of our psychiatric medications are, or other medications are, then you're risking increasing the levels of those statins, and you're increasing that risk of that like muscle death, which is bad, right? So, and here's the other thing. The statin studies, for the most part, are excluding patients with psychiatric disease as well as women. And so we don't necessarily even have data on our patients. So um, statins are like, I mean, if you look at like the most prescribed medications in the country, they're like probably third. They're like top 10, probably like two of them in the top 10, um, and probably prescribed a little bit too often. Don't treat the numbers, treat the data, treat the patient. Just don't treat just the cholesterol. We need to meet these criteria. All right. So that's cholesterol. So I said I wasn't really worried about saturated fat in your diet. I am worried about some of the foods. I talked about that before. I'm not really worried about cholesterol in your diet. Once again, I might be worried about some of the foods. I'm not really worried about eggs, but like red meat, we're going to talk about, right? Red meat has saturated fat and cholesterol. It does a lot of other bad stuff. So if you're thinking, oh, fats and saturated fats and cholesterol are fine, red meat, it's got a lot of iron. But the data shows that red meat consumption can cause a lot of problems. So let's get into protein. Wow, this is such a controversial topic. And I don't really feel like I am going to be able to give you the definitive answer. I'm going to try and guide you and give you some facts that I think you'll find helpful. There is such contention on this now that there's like a craze of protein consumption in the United States. I don't know if this is going on in other countries, but like there's just such a craze of like, oh, eat more protein, eat more protein. You've got a lot of influencers saying to eat more protein, and like, of course, the keto diet includes like higher protein amounts. The carnivore diet is, my least favorite diet of all. I see no benefit to it whatsoever. Like, I see possibilities for the keto diet. Um, I think the paleo diet is just kind of silly and unnecessary, and I think the carnivore diet is probably the worst diet, most extreme diet. I just don't. I can't get on board with that one. Um, but this protein thing, and they're putting protein in absolutely everything. They're putting protein in like candy and cereal, and basically it's getting packed into all these ultra processed foods, and then it's often accompanied by sweeteners, and often they're artificial sweeteners, because it's like, oh, this is a low calorie, like they're trying to say, oh, you get all this protein, and this is this David bar that I'm not a fan of. You had this guy who made this company, the RX bar, which, if I'm going to promote a bar, I will promote the RX bar. I promote make your own bars, but like the RX bar is probably one of the few bars that doesn't have any additives. It's all real food. The sugar contents are not low, but they're all from like whole dates. And so it's probably like the best. If you're going to take a bar, the RX bar is like the healthiest one. And so he sold this to like Kellogg's or something. And then he had like some sort of non-compete agreement. And then after it expired, he created the David bar with, I think, Peter Attia is in on that. And like, I think Peter Attia is a smart guy, and I think he has a lot of good things to say, but I think he goes way too far with stuff. And like, I'm Mr. Anti ultra processed food, and to me that David bar is like really processed. Like, look at the ingredients on it, and it's got that weird EPG stuff in it. It's like this. They bought the company and the patent on this stuff, and it's some sort of like non-absorbable fat, um, and it can cause like some diarrhea type issues or loose bowel movements in some people. I ate a David bar once because I just had to know what it was like, Also, I've seen scientific tests on it that showed that like it doesn't have as much protein as it says it does. It's supposed to have like 28 grams, but it only has like 22, and it's got way more fat, but it's like this EPG fat, so they don't count it, and it's got way more calories than it says it has in it, but like it's a lot of those calories are coming from the EPG, which is like not absorbable, and it's like there's these artificial sugars and stuff in it, and it's being purported as like the lowest calorie, highest protein bar, and it's like, can we just eat real food? Like, this is not like, the problem here is real food does not make money. And it's like these influencers and these like people making products, they all have to like actually make something to make money. And people are trying to make money off of you with all this food. And really, you just need to buy fruits and vegetables, fish, a little bit of meats, maybe some dairy, and some whole grains, and be done with it. People say, "Oh, it's so expensive to cook." How much does a bunch of dried beans cost? Nothing. It's like $1, $1.50 for a pound of this stuff, and it makes like a giant pot, right? And this is like some of the healthiest stuff you could eat. But like they want you to buy their stuff, and you're spending $3 on a bar when like you have way more calories and healthy stuff and vitamins and nutrients in like a pound of black beans that's dry, that turns into like 4 or 5 pounds when it gets reconstituted with water. So yeah, I'm prefacing this. I like protein. I'm going to say a lot of good stuff about protein, but like I think you can't follow these trends and these crazes, because like they it's like this is it's all just some sort of money making scheme, and they put a little bit of science in there, and they're smarter than you, and they talk like lawyers, and they turn into like a cult. And it's just, eat real food. That's really the answer. You don't need all this like extra stuff. So let's jump into protein. So what is protein? Right? It's a linear series of up to 20 different amino acids bonded together by peptide bonds. And peptide bonds are just bonds between amino acids. All right. So you have to have at least 20 amino acids bonded together, and various amino acids are kind of connected together. Usually it's a lot more than 20, could be hundreds, and then it's all kind of twists together. And that's a protein. All right. You've got your essential amino acids, and you've got your non-essential amino acids. The essential are the ones our bodies can't make. Our non-essentials our bodies can make, but it's still nice to take them in from our diet as well. And then you've got conditional, which are ones that our body can make, but when our body's under stress, maybe it's under starvation or whatever, it's got, you're ill, something like that, it may not be able to make them. All right, so some of the non-essentials are always made, and some of them are conditional on this, on the body being stressed, whether it's going to make it or not. All right, so first off, I just want to say, and that is that plant protein is as good as animal protein. There's some evangelist out there that is just like preaching this animal protein is superior, and I just do not understand. Like, I don't understand her argument. It just doesn't make sense to me. It's like, amino acids are amino acids, and when you look at the composition of amino acids, like there's a nutritionist, Christopher Gardner. He put together a great chart where you can kind of see how much of each amino acid is in each different type of food. And they'll say things like, rice is not a complete protein because it doesn't have all the amino acids. It's not really true. They all have all the amino acids, just some of them may not have as much as you would need. But it's like, what, are you getting all your amino acids from this one food? No, I mean, you're eating other stuff. You're eating vegetables, you're eating other grains, you're having wheat, you're having rice, you're having beans. You're not just eating white rice and nothing else, right? So this is, yeah. Does meat have like everything you need, and you could basically get everything from like a steak every day? Yes, but then it has all these other downsides. So this is like kind of a stupid argument. So all plants have protein, whether it's like broccoli or rice or whatever it is. They have protein. The protein in there is just as good as animal protein. If you're eating a variety, you're getting all the protein you need. All right. And here's the other thing. Almost every study that I could find says increased animal protein is associated with higher risk of death, and increased plant protein is lower risk. Why this is, we don't know. What is it that's and it doesn't have to do with the protein. It has to do with the other stuff in there. The stuff in the plants is more helpful, and the stuff in these, I don't need the comments from people that like think that eating plants are poison. Um, but this is population data, and this is what our current understanding is. All right. So some studies show that excessive leucine, and here's some reasons why animal protein may be actually not as good as plant protein, and why, or it's just as good. The protein's just as good, but why it could have more risk. So there's a couple of theories out there. Some studies show that excessive leucine, which is an amino acid, and meat contains more of it. Because even though I said when you look at that Christopher Gardner chart where it shows the amounts are pretty, the balance of amino acids is fairly similar. There's a couple that like are in greater proportion in meat than they are in plants, but like meat in general just has more protein. So like if you look at the chart, it'll look like there's the same amount of protein in animal and plants, but those are percentages, right? You have to imagine like a serving of meat has like 30 grams of protein, and like the something else, an egg might be like what, like one egg has what, like 10 or 8 or something, and like pasta or something might have like 10 or 12. So it's not as high, but it's just the percentage that's in there are relatively similar, right? So even though the percentage of leucine may be about the same, because there is more protein in the meat, there's more leucine. And leucine, having excessive leucine, may be a factor in cardiovascular disease. So if you're getting adequate protein from plants, you don't need to go overboard and get extra protein. And that's what we're doing now. We're like promoting this, like have 2 to 3 times the daily recommended amounts of protein. Well, if you have too much leucine, that actually could be a factor in cardiovascular disease, and probably more to come on that. There's some other studies that show that gut bacteria responds to compounds in red meat, and we don't even necessarily know which compounds, but like compounds in red meat may be a factor through the production of something called trimethylamine N oxide, or TMAO, which can be harmful. So here it is. It's like it's not the protein in the meat, it's some other compounds, and our gut bacteria responds to it, and it produces this chemical which could be bad for us, right? And here's the other thing: processed meat, and we've talked about this before, and red meat are most strongly linked to poor health outcomes. If you eat too much red meat, you eat processed meat's linked to cancer, red meat is linked to cancer. Um, I think you can eat them in moderation, but like people that are on these diets are eating these like 3 meals a day every day, which is not great. And even diets high in white meat, which is low in saturated fat, have shown some equal bad outcomes to red meat. And so it's probably not the saturated fat either, right? This is what I talked about in the last episode. I'm not really thinking that the saturated fat is the problem. And there are foods out there that have high saturated fat that are not even in meat, right? And that are in plants. So, next point, saturated fat, cholesterol, and sodium are likely not the problem here. And those have been the things that have been demonized: the saturated fat, the cholesterol, and the sodium, and which are found in higher quantities in these meat foods. But it's probably other things going on, kind of like the leucine and the TMAO and other stuff that we don't even know about yet. Another problem is the lack of fiber in meat, and you don't have the phytonutrients, which are nutrients. Phyto means plant, nutrients from plants. You're not having those in the meats. And then there's certain vitamins and minerals. We've talked about these before. I'm talking about folate. I'm talking about magnesium that you're also lacking in meat. And that's probably also a factor. So these people that are not having enough plants, they're missing the fiber, the phytonutrients, the vitamins, things like that. And like, can you take a multivitamin? Yes, but like, I always think that there's something magical about when it's in a natural food. All right. So, um, next, short term, here's the other thing. People that do these high meat diets do get some short term improvements in certain factors, like they may lose weight, they may have less fatigue, they may feel better in general, but in the long term, signs are pointing towards earlier death, more cardiovascular disease, and things like that. So there may be some short-term improvements where like you go on this diet and you're like, oh wow, I look better, I feel better, I like what's going on here. But then you die 20 years earlier than you would have otherwise, right? And we haven't had people really on these diets long enough in big enough numbers to see what's going to happen. I think we're going to see in the future that a lot of these people promoting these diets are going to be having some problems. All right. And here's another point: almost no one is deficient in protein. This idea that you don't get enough protein, it's almost impossible not to get enough protein. There are folks that like have tried to do studies where they reduce protein in people that had kidney disease, and if you have certain kidney disease, eating too much protein can be hard on the kidneys, and they couldn't get their protein below the recommended amounts. Like everyone is getting enough protein just by eating, and like we're all eating more calories than we need. That's the other thing. We eat almost everyone consumes more calories than their body needs, and so you're getting enough protein. I don't know what someone's eating, how few calories you would have to eat and what foods you would have to eat to like be deficient in protein, but it's pretty darn hard to do. Most foods, including plants, contain all 9 essential amino acids, and eating a diversity of plants is more than meets the needs. We talked about that a second ago. And so you may be wondering, how much protein do I think that you should be taking? Now, these are the point the 0.8 grams per kilogram or 0.36 grams per pound for the average sedentary adult. That's from the like official government source that puts out dietary guidelines. And that zero point 0.8 meets the needs of 97% of the population. It's actually like 97.5 or something. So we're talking about like, so most people don't even need that much. It's like a bell curve. And like half the people need at least like 0.55 or something like that. And then you go 2 standard deviations up. And that takes you around a little over 97%. And so there's a few people that need more than that, but most people get more than that without even trying. Okay. So that's for like an average 80 kilogram adult. I'm a little over 80 kilograms. That's like 60 grams of protein a day. It's not that hard to do. Um, Now there are some different a lot of people will say this is just what you need to survive, but not to thrive. I hear this thing. Um, there are some recommendations to take more in certain situations. So if you're like 40 or 50 and kind of over that age range, they do recommend a little bit higher. So 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram. So a little bit higher for older folks because there is some risk of muscle loss. You're losing muscle. You might need a little bit more. Not the 2 to 3 grams that a lot of people talk about, but more, 1 to 1.2. Um, if you're exercising regularly, and this is all age groups here, you're lifting weights, you're exercising, you probably need a little bit more, zero point 0.8 to 1.2 grams per kilogram. Um, if you are an endurance athlete, that's like less than 1% of you out there. Or if you're trying to gain muscle mass, like you're not just working out at the gym, maintaining your muscle mass, trying to stay the same size, but you're actually trying to get bigger and gain more muscle mass, then you probably need a bit more, right? So if you're like an athlete or someone who's like trying to be like a bodybuilder or like build up your muscle mass, increase your muscle mass, you need like more like 1.2 to 2 grams per kilogram. And that's where these folks are coming in saying, oh, everyone needs 2 grams per kilogram. And it's like, one, that's the upper limit of what the people that need the most protein That is the upper limit for those folks. And this is like less than 1% of the population. Most people are not gaining muscle mass. Most people are not going to the gym this much. You probably should be, but if you're not, you don't need that much protein, right? And most people aren't. So if you're hitting it hard and exercising a lot and stuff, and here's the other thing: if you're working out a lot, if you're working out this much, you're probably eating more to make up for the energy loss, and then you're getting more protein anyway. And so this idea that you have to like squeeze in more protein somehow with all this extra supplements and stuff, it's just not really there. Um, the fact is, your body can't store protein. It can store fat, it can store carbs. And then if we go over our limit in storing carbs, they get turned into fat. If we go over storing, if we don't use our protein, it turns into fat and gets stored that way. You do gain weight from protein. It doesn't just get peed out. You pee out the nitrogen, but you keep the rest. It gets stored as fat. You can store protein in like your muscles of your arms and your legs. I mean, your heart and things like that need the most muscle. It's like the most important for like your organs to function. And but they could always just get it from your arms and your legs if they really needed it. Of course, better to have strong arms and legs. But so if you are hitting it in the gym really hard, if you're going to the gym and gaining muscle mass, you probably only need about 1.2. If you're going extra hard and you're like really into it, and you're going like 4 or 5 times a week, yeah, maybe 2 grams per kilogram is what you would need. But for the person going 2 to 3 times a week and maintaining zero point 0.8 to 1.2, and those that are trying to gain maybe 1.2 to a little bit more than that is enough. Um, and also, you can only absorb about 25 to 35 grams of protein at once, so you need to spread it out throughout the day, right? And if you're trying to lose weight, um, protein can be helpful, and you probably want to be taking it a bit more because you're trying to lose fat and gain muscle, right? If you're trying to use the protein to lose weight, the way you do it is you gain muscle mass as you lose fat. And so you're going to have to be going to the gym and dieting and burning fat and gaining muscle. So you're going to need maybe 1.2 grams per kilogram for those folks. Um, so those are my recommendations based on my research of lots of different um, the British uh, the British recommendations, the American recommendations. That was the best stuff I could find. So foods supplemented with protein are not necessary and could lead to health risk. So I'm talking like, do you need it in bars? Do you need it in cereal? Do you need it in processed foods? No. And it could cause health risks through getting too much protein or getting like other junk in there and other processed items or just consuming extra calories that you weren't going to burn and turning it into fat, right? Um, Substituting protein for other food may help with weight loss. So like, if you need to be in a calorie deficit, at least 500 calories. We talked about this a while back. So if you're trying to lose weight, you need to be in a calorie deficit. Um, it's recommended that your protein intake be 10 to 30% of your total calories. And so you've got to knock your calories down. And then if you want to boost up the percent of your total calories that are protein, that could help because eating protein can make you full and less likely to eat more. But if you're just like shoving protein down your throat as supplements and bars and things like that, that's just going to end up being extra calories. And so if you're using this technique, you really have to be careful with it, right? You can't just be saying, I got to get all my protein in. It's like, and you're not even hungry for it. It's like, no, you don't. What you need to do is eat less. That's what you need to do. Eat less. And if eating higher protein content food when you are hungry helps you to eat less, then that could be a good strategy, right? Fiber, I recommend protein and fiber. If you eat when you do eat or when you have a snack or something and that food contains a lot of fiber and protein, I'm talking about like nuts and seeds is one example, but there are many. That will make you more full. And then when you're full, stop eating. Don't say, I need more protein. You don't. You need less food. So let the protein be used to help you consume less food. Don't make yourself feel like, oh, I need my 2 grams per kilogram. And it's like, well, I think there's 4 calories per gram of protein. And so if you're getting 2 grams per kilogram and if you, honestly, if you're overweight, you're probably at least 100 kilograms. And so what is that? 100 kilograms times 2 grams per kilogram. So that's 200 grams of protein. And then there's four calories per gram of protein. So that's 800 calories just in the protein, right? And so like if you're trying to get that large amount of protein, you've already used up 800 of the calories you're supposed to have for the day, and you might need to be only eating 1500 a day. And you need to have fats and carbs and other things as well. And so don't feel like you have to shove in that protein, right? Don't be like, oh, I'm gonna eat the protein stuff and stuff with extra protein. And no, just eat whole food and eat foods that are higher in protein and higher in fiber, because they will fill you up. But don't worry about like that you're not getting enough protein. That's not something you need to worry about. All right. Um, Getting too much protein could have some risk for the kidney, especially in people that already have problems with their kidney. And restricting plants in favor of high protein is not a good idea. So if you're like, oh, I'm going to sacrifice some healthy foods in order to have protein, probably not the best idea. All right. So hopefully that I've been as balanced as I can be, and even though I'm not a food scientist, you've gained something from that. And we're gonna round this off with foods that are good for mental health. All right. It's kind of a good round off. We're gonna finish up with nutrition this time. And on the next episode that we're doing our obesity stuff. So we're not just doing obesity, but we're doing like lifestyle medicine and just like diet and exercise and things. I'm going to go through a ton of studies that show how improving your diet and exercise can make your mental health better. And so that's what the next few episodes are going to be. Um, and the ones after that, we'll get to the drugs, the meds that we use to treat obesity. All right. So, rounding out kind of my diet recommendations, we're going to talk about foods that are good for mental health. So, shellfish. Shellfish are awesome. They're high in protein, B12, iron, zinc, magnesium, copper, omega-3. There's almost nothing better than shellfish. Oysters, we know, are like one of the highest foods in omega-3s. Mussels are like the highest protein to fat ratio food. And I know I just got through talking about how I thought protein wasn't the end all be all, but what I said was eat foods that are high in protein because you will eat less of them. I went to Belgium a few months ago, and one of their national dishes, other than French fries, is a dish called moule frite, which is mussels and fries. So it also contains fries. So like that's like the national dish. It's like French fries, or they don't call them French fries in Belgium. They call them Belgian fries. They probably just call them fries, and mussels. And oh my gosh, there were so many mussels in this bucket. I didn't even know if I could finish them all. And it's like when you eat a bunch of mussels and it's like all this protein and like connective tissue and things, and it's like in this like delicious broth and sauce and stuff, and you get full, right? And then you've got all that protein, B12, iron, zinc, magnesium, copper, all that good stuff in there. You can buy frozen mussels at the store. They're super easy to make. Um, you can get like tiny little clams. All you gotta do is wash those guys. If any of them are open, and if they're alive, shut them with your fingers. And if they don't stay closed, they're dead. Get rid of those. You want the ones that are you want them to be sealed. If they're alive, and if they're frozen, um, can't really tell. But freezing tends to prevent bad stuff from getting in. And then what you do is you just basically put that in a pot, maybe dump some wine in that pot, boil it, and let maybe you've got some garlic, some butter, or something in there. I don't know, some seasonings. But you could just do like wine, like white wine, and just boil those in there. Once they're all open, they're cooked, and pour those in a bowl. Super easy. Um, and then you just, and because they're in the shells, it takes a little bit longer to eat, and we know the slower we eat, the less we eat, and you're getting all that good stuff from there. So shellfish, big thumbs up. Recommendation is to eat a few times a month. Remember, in moderation, we don't want to go every day on this stuff, right? A few times a month, shellfish, really good for mental health. Next, legumes. You know how much I love legumes. Talk about beans, chickpeas, lentils, peas, yellow split peas, green split peas, black dals, like dal from DHAL, from like the uh, southern South Asia, right? Like urad dal and red lentils and like chana dal and like all this type of stuff. It's such good stuff, right? I love my legumes. They're full of protein, fiber, complex carbohydrates, and not the simple carbs. You know, I'm all in on carbs if they're complex, and legumes are going to give that to you. All right, peanuts are legumes as well, very good for you as well. Healthy fats. Um, Next, extra virgin olive oil, monounsaturated fatty acid. I love extra virgin olive oil, and like if you can have it raw, you have like a really high quality one. You like squeeze that over a salad, or just kind of top your pasta with that. You know, like I said, Brian Johnson does like the shot. I squirt it in my mouth when I pat when I'm thinking about eating a snack. I do a like a squirt of olive oil. That's extra virgin, really good. Make sure you're getting the really good stuff. Um, it can be pricey, but like it's delicious and it's good for you. Next, dark chocolate. Um, this is a fermented food. There's a couple of different kinds of fermented foods. There are fermented foods that have live bacteria in them, like kimchi and most sauerkrauts and things like that, which are those probiotics, which are good for you. But then there are fermented foods that like wine would be an example, beer would be an example, chocolate would be an example, where a fermentation process was used, but there's no live bacteria in them. There are still benefits from this. Sourdough bread would be an example, right? These bacteria, when they're alive, do something to this food that produce healthy qualities in it. And even though they pass away in the heating processes that are used to produce these products, um, they leave behind good stuff. All right. So dark chocolate is a fermented food. It has something called flavanols, which we don't entirely understand. Like, how good are these for us? And there's tons of them in there, and they have health benefits: iron, magnesium, zinc, copper, phosphorus, fiber. The darker the really the darker the chocolate, the better. And I remember, when I was first getting into dark chocolate, and I'd hear like 90, 95%. That's impossible to eat. I went when I was in South Africa last summer. I picked up some 100% dark chocolate, like super high quality, like organic store. I talked about that store many episodes ago. Um, this 100% dark chocolate from there, I'm still munching on it. I got a big disc of it. It is good. It's got kind of like a sour quality. It's the only 100% I've ever had. It's not super smooth, which I think is a good thing. Like, that smoothness is often because they add like lecithin in there, which is like an additive that like might not be the best for our gut microbiome, and like it's just used to like make it more appealing, but it doesn't add anything. It, if anything, it takes away in the quality of the nutrients. So it's like this 100%, it's got like a sourness quality. I don't know. I really like it. I'm going to be sad when it's gone, and because I don't know where I'd be able to find something like this again. But that's why I like to travel. You never know what you're going to find, bring back, and enjoy. um, so the darker the chocolate means, it means higher calories and more fat, but less sugar. So that's basically what makes something dark. The darker the chocolate, because you've got milk chocolate, which is like usually like 30% chocolate, cacao, which is the cocoa bean. Um, the darker ones, as the percentage gets higher, you're lowering your sugar content. By the time you get up to 100% chocolate, it's like no sugar. The 90% is like maybe 2 grams. It's very low. So if you do happen to follow the keto diet, a very, very dark chocolate can be in your future because it does not contain very much sugar, right? They also have more. The darker they are, the more nutrients are in there, right? So if we have less space being taken up by sugar, we have more space being taken up by that cacao. And actually, 85% dark chocolate has been shown to perhaps improve mood. I've got this study here. Consumption of 85% cacao dark chocolate improves mood in association with gut microbial changes in healthy adults, a randomized controlled trial, Journal of Nutritional Biochemistry 2022. So if you're trying to get better mental health, you might want to get 85 or greater. All right. Other foods good for mental health: liquids, water, unsweetened tea, unsweetened coffee. Don't drink your calories. I can't say that enough. And then in moderation, eggs. The recommendation is like 6 per week. I think you could probably do more than that, but like eggs are super nutritious. Don't take the yellow part out. All the nutrition is in the yellow. I know that's where the cholesterol is, but remember, we don't worry about cholesterol. The white is just pure protein. All the goodies, all like the health benefits, and all the things that are not protein, but like other little vitamins and minerals and things, they're in they're in the yolk. All right. Um, Dairy in moderation. Of course, if you're lactose intolerant, probably don't want to do this. There are certain types of cheeses and dairy products that those that are lactose intolerant can have because they don't have lactose or much lactose in them, right? So just they're made from dairy, but the lactose is basically gone. It's consumed by bacteria or whatever that have fermented the cheese. So if you are lactose intolerant, that doesn't mean that you can't have dairy. It just means that you need to um, search to see which ones don't have a lot of lactose in them. So dairy is still on the table for those that are lactose intolerant, just not as much. So milk, unprocessed healthy cheeses like feta, mozzarella, ricotta, cottage cheese. Cottage cheese is one of the healthiest things that you could eat. Parmesan has got so much protein in it. It's like one of the most protein, probably the most protein rich cheese you can have. Real Parmesan, not that green can Kraft crap. All right. Swiss cheese, goat cheese, blue cheese, cheddar cheese, whatever you like, unprocessed healthy cheeses. Most cheeses are unprocessed. You know, no Velveeta, no American cheese, no pizza cheese, no, you know, cheese like substance. Some things will actually say processed cheese. Stay away from those. Other dairy unsweetened yogurt, we are, and then kefir, of course. I'm a big fan of that. Um, in moderation, also lean meat. So recommendation is no more than if you are a meat eater and you're trying to be healthy, no more than one serving per day, and red meat no more than 1 to 2 a week. So especially for females, having red meat like once a week, um, a lot of menstruating aged females are low in iron, and a good way to get iron could be red meat, but like I would limit it to like once and definitely no more than twice a week. Um, and lean meats are better. All right. Let's go through some other nutrients that are good for mental health. So these are some nutrients that help relieve depression. Iron builds hemoglobin, involved in carrying oxygen to the brain. Magnesium regulates neurotransmitters involved in mood. We had a whole episode on magnesium. Potassium, it's necessary for electric impulses in neurons. Selenium assists in creating antioxidants in the brain and helps the thyroid. Zinc, we had a whole episode on that one as well, regulates brain signals and neuroplasticity. Vitamin A helps with neuroplasticity. Thiamine, we've talked about the B vitamins. We had an episode on B vitamins. Thiamine has a role in energy production, B6 in brain development and function, folate in the creation of new cells, B12 involved in production of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine, and then vitamin C, an antioxidant, right? So all those are really great for relieving depression. And then supplements. So if you're like, oh, I'm going to take a supplement that has all that. Well, supplements lack the phytonutrients that are in whole foods. So better to just, the Zoe podcast is a podcast I really like, and they always say eat 30 plants a week. And so if you're eating 30 different types of plants a week, and I know, oh man, that sounds so hard. Cinnamon counts, cloves count, ginger counts, garlic counts, right? So a lot of these could be like pepper counts, right? So when you're looking at your 30 plants a week, um, there's a lot of spices and seasonings. Cumin, you could include stuff like that. And then herbs like basil, cilantro, parsley, those all count as plants as well. Um, so it's actually a lot easier to get your 30 plants a week than you think. And then, of course, rice is a plant, wheat is a plant. Um, Different species of beans. Red lentils is a plant. Black beans are a plant. All of those are different plants. So like, it's not that hard to actually get 30 plants a week. And then we think of all the regular vegetables. You have salad greens, and maybe you get mixed greens, and there's 4 different types. You got arugula in there, you got lettuce in there, you got spinach in there. You can get your 30 plants a week. And then you get all these phytonutrients, right? And then you get all your complete proteins as well. All right. So supplements lack phytonutrients, and supplements also don't contain all the naturally occurring compounds. So, for example, vitamin E supplement only contains one of the 8 tocopherols or tocotrienols. So there are actually 8 vitamin E's, and when you take the supplement, you're only getting one of them. You're not getting the other 7, right? So it says, oh, there's vitamin E, but we never think about vitamin E1, E2, E3. We just don't learn about those, but there actually are 8 vitamin E's. And so when you take that vitamin, you're not getting them all. Eat the food. All right. Other foods that are good for mental health. Organic foods. Um, so, organic foods, if you can afford them, are better than non-organic foods. I don't think that this should make or break. Like, if you don't have the money, um, you don't have to. That this could be a lower priority for you. And then there's a list. Actually, I heard this list was somewhat controversial, but I kind of like the list. Um, there's some that are, if they're not organic, it's more problematic, and there's some that if they're not organic, it's actually not as big of a deal. So this organization put out the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, and so like the Dirty Dozen are the ones that are like, if you're gonna buy organic, these are the ones you'd want to concentrate on, and the Clean 15 you probably don't need organic because there's not a big difference. All right, so and something that kind of what you can kind of do to understand this is like things that are exposed to pesticides are the things that you should be more worried about. Stuff that's like in the dirt, um, like an onion or something, or that has like an encasing on it, like an avocado. Like you don't eat the skin of an avocado, and so that pesticide typically doesn't get into the flesh, and so that's less of a problem. And like it typically doesn't get into the dirt, and so stuff that's like in the dirt is less of a problem, right? And the things that like a tomato or a strawberry, which are like, just out there in the air and like you're eating the whole thing, those are the ones that would be like better to have organic. So the Dirty Dozen, what are they? Strawberries, spinach, kale, greens, nectarines, apples, grapes, peppers, cherries, peaches, pears, celery, tomatoes. All right, the volume of these vegetables needed to be problematic is likely much higher than anyone would ever consume. So do not avoid vegetables due to this fear. If you can afford organic, then these would be the ones to focus on. If not able to buy organic, then just clean them thoroughly. All right. So not critical, but if you want to do this, this is just kind of some guidelines. And what are the clean 15? Avocados, corn, pineapple, onions, papaya, sweet peas, asparagus, melons, kiwi, cabbage, mushrooms, mango, sweet potatoes. Generally, foods with a thick covering that is not eaten are clean. And you might be thinking, but cabbage is, they peel the outside leaves off. You don't even see them. And then you'll probably peel some off yourself, right? Asparagus, I don't know about that one. It's in the list, but perhaps asparagus is not exposed the way it grows. Um, Mushrooms are typically grown like in inside places, and they're just not, we don't use pesticides with mushrooms, right? So, but we do eat like the whole mushroom. But most of the rest of those, they have some sort of coating or they're under the ground. And then kind of round it off, food's bad for mental health. And this is the one that I foot stomp over and over again. Simple carbs, right? Not carbs in general, simple carbs. Fried and fast foods, refined flour, ultra processed foods, sodas, sweets, pastries, most condiments, things like ketchup, sweet pickles, things like that, with the exception of mustard, olive oil, smashed avocado, pesto, tahini, hot sauce, vinegar, spices. Those are some condiments that are not bad. They don't have sugar in them, right? Most condiments, uh, they either have a bunch of fat like mayonnaise or sugar like ketchup. You can make your own ketchup and not put a lot of sugar and control it if you do want to make a healthy ketchup. The other things I would say are bad are cured and processed meats, bacon, sausage, deli meats. And then I also would just say supplements, bars, and powders because they're ultra processed foods. You know, remember I was saying that added sugar, that acetylsulfam K, that I was like, I've never heard of that one. Well, I found it in the protein powder that I was using, and I was like, oh my gosh, I thought there was no sugar in here, and there's not. There's this sugar substitute, and I was just like, I just want the protein. Anytime you're getting protein, they always have to throw a sweetener in there. It's like they think people are incapable of stomaching it without a sweetener. Even if you're mixing it with fruit and you're like, well, I'm adding my own sweetener. And this is why, I think I'm on my last can of powder. I'm not going to waste money. I'm going to finish my protein powder I have now, and I don't think I'm going to get any more. The more I look into this stuff, the more I'm just like, I'm looking. There's sucralose in there. There's acetyl K or whatever is in there. Um, it's just, and this thing that we like. I am trying to build muscle mass, but I'm trying to eat salmon to try and beef up my protein to do it. And I know in building muscle, it's a long process. It takes years to really, if of consistent good diet and good resistance training. The number one factor, here's the other thing: eating a lot of protein, it translates into a very small gain in muscle mass. 90% of muscle growth is resistance training, right? So that's weights. It's resistance against your muscles, and it's putting your muscles to failure. I'm not going to go a lot into exercise here, but I will say if you are trying to gain muscle, protein is probably not the thing that you need to be worried about. It's having a nice hard workout where you're putting your muscles to failure and you're giving them adequate time to rest, and you're consuming protein within several hours of having that exercise. I've heard like within like 3 or 4 hours on either side, um, which you're probably going to eat a meal around that time. That's how you grow muscle, and you wait. You go to the gym 3 days a week, and you hit it hard, and you do resistance training. You go to failure, which means you basically lift until you can't lift anymore, right? You do as many sets or reps until you just can't push the weight up anymore. And you do this for years, and you have consistency, and you have adequate nutrition, and also you have adequate sleep. Got to have adequate sleep. That's a part of all of this as well. All right. So, just to kind of give my final line on this, I just like the idea. There's a lot of controversial topics that I've talked about, but I think what I can agree with everything is just eat real food and get rid of the ultra processed stuff. Eat a variety of food. Eat a wide variety of food. Eat the foods that are a little bit less healthy less often, and the ones that are better more often. More plants, and then less calories in general. Calorie restriction, we've talked about that. So I've given you my tips throughout these several episodes. I hope that you know you've learned something from them, and maybe you're going to make changes to the way you eat based on it. But that this is kind of a conclusion of my nutrition section, and we're going to talk about some studies on. We're going to continue to talk about food, but we're going to talk about studies on how a lot of this advice I've been giving you, if you actually follow this, what does it actually translate into from a mental health standpoint? Because this is a mental health podcast, and this is your brain on drugs, and this is kind of like this is your brain on food, right? Because food is kind of like a drug, right? Food is medicine, and so how does this food affect your brain? That's what we're going to talk about. Some actual studies on that next time. So I want to thank you so much for joining me. I will hope you will join me next time, and I will see you then.